having had a religious experience as even prima facie reason for believing what the experience seems to reveal, would be provided if those who had religious experience had a proven inability to form correct beliefs more often than incorrect ones by means of their spiritual sense. And it's not unreasonable I say, to think that there might be some hope of doing this by showing that the diversity in the contents of the world's religions is so great that on the truth of any one of them, the majority of people who come to beliefs on the basis of their religious experiences must be coming to false beliefs. Okay, so consider by way of analogy the following situation. You're standing with some friends by the side of a deserted road to watch a car rally. After a few minutes, a lone car goes noisily by, and it seems to you to be blue. And this seeming to you is, then, via the principle of credulity, a prima facie good reason for you to believe that the car that's just passed is indeed blue, given that you've no reason to believe that all other things are not equal. For example, you're not aware of any special considerations obtaining, it's broad daylight, you have an unobstructed view of the road, as do your friends, you've just had your eyesight tested and it was 20/20, you certainly no reason to think then your colour perception is off, and so on. Okay, so you therefore believe the car's blue, and you think yourself reasonable for doing so. So far, so good. You say to the man standing next to you that you think that the blue car that's just passed was, let's say, an original S-type Jaguar. You venture this opinion. He looks back at you somewhat startled. Well, it was a Jaguar all right, he says, but it wasn't blue, it was bright red. The lady standing next to him confirms his judgment, the man's. It's certainly red, she says. Someone else chimes in. Of course it was red. Another says, referring to the first man's judgment again, not yours. That's right, red. Well, what is it rational for you to believe now about the colour of the car that's just passed? It strikes me it would be rational for you to withdraw your judgment that the car was probably blue and replace it with the judgment that the car was probably red. Or it could be, if I tell enough details to the story, I could generate such a story. So, to the extent that what seems to you to be the case is contradicted by the numerous and consistent testimonies of other independent witnesses, you have reason to believe that special considerations obtain, even if you can't see what they might be, and thus to be more sceptical about your original judgment. If the testimonies are sufficiently numerous, consistent and independent, you should indeed withdraw your original judgment and replace it with the collective judgment of these other people. If the testimonies of others are not quite numerous, unanimous or independent enough for this, well then perhaps you should suspend the judgment altogether. Indeed, for a certain telling of the fleshing out of the details of a story, you would make it the case that you should suspend judgment altogether. Let me alter the situation slightly then, in fact. As before, it seems to you that the car that's just sped by was blue. When you say this to the man next to you, he replies that it was red. Okay. However, the lady standing next to him in this version says, well, wait a minute, it was jet black. Someone else says, it was yellow with pink spots. Another says, what car? What is it rational for you to believe now about the colour of the car? To the extent that what seems to you to be the case is contradicted by the testimonies of others, you've reason to be sceptical about the veridicality of your perceptions. However, if those testimonies themselves conflict with one another, then to the extent that they cannot be said to support any judgment more than they can be said to support any other, it's rational for you to stick by your original judgment as the one most probably correct amongst them, whilst downgrading the probability that it is correct by some, and perhaps considerable, extent. If the collective testimony of your peers is worthless as a guide to the colour of the car, it's simply too various to support any particular judgment, then you're thrown back on the fact that it certainly seemed to you that the car was blue. And whilst now you should be much more sceptical about this too than you would have been before hearing your peer's testimony, you should believe that it's more likely to be blue than it is to be any other particular colour, which is of course quite compatible with believing that it's more likely to be some other colour than it is to be blue. If you had to put your money anywhere, you put it on blue. But in putting it on blue, you'd think that it more likely than not that you would be losing your money, or about to lose your money. In the presence of testimony which conflicts with your experience, yet which is so mutually inconsistent that it, as it were, cancels itself out, you are always justified in sticking with your original judgment in at least that very minimal sense, though, let's underscore the fact that is quite a minimal sense. At this stage then, the inductive soundness of the argument from having had a religious experience oneself depends on certain empirical contingencies concerning how variable and mutually exclusive the contents and testimonies of the world's religions are. The contents and testimonies of those who claim to have had a religious experience. Now, this is a question which isn't really within the field of philosophy of religion, and I must therefore leave my conclusion rather hypothetical. If it seems to you that there's a God, and the testimony against its being true that there's a God is not very great or mutually consistent in itself, then it could remain overall reasonable for you to believe that there probably is a God. on the basis of this experience alone. If, on the other hand, there's numerous and unanimous testimony from others that, on the basis of their own experiences, you're mistaken, well, you should accept that you probably are mistaken, unless that is you have other arguments for God, for example, for a design argument to buttress your belief here, but putting that to one side. You should believe that you are probably mistaken, and that despite what appears to you to be the case, there is no God. If a testimony from others is so mutually inconsistent that it neither supports nor undermines the claim that there's a God, if it, as I put it, cancels itself out, well, then it could remain overall reasonable for you to believe that your experience raises the probability that there is a God to some extent, but that might very well be a very minimal extent, as I say. Appearances can be deceptive.